Collective, we are talking about privacy in the post-COVID era. And today we have Samantha Simms, who is with the Information Collective, as I mentioned before, and she is going to walk us through some of the groundbreaking issues that are showing up in data privacy and talk a little bit about how, as a professional working in the privacy space, you can manage through these. Samantha is a longtime friend and colleague. She and I worked together at Carlson Wagon Lee Travel. Samantha also has experience working at Linklaters, at Colt, at a number of UK government agencies, and she is an absolute leader and thought leader in this space. So welcome, Samantha. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Lisa Beth. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here today to be able to speak with a group of compliance professionals about what is an increasingly important topic. You know, for a long time, we've heard a lot of polarized views on data privacy. We've heard that data privacy is dead, that it doesn't exist. We've also heard views that privacy is not important. In fact, today in the UK, as we start to emerge from the unprecedented threat and challenge that has been the global lockdown from COVID-19, we are having a huge debate around data privacy because the UK's contact tracing app has been launched today. And many people are expressing concerns about whether the government has been high-handed in its application of a contact tracing app, or whether we are not doing enough. Have we got enough rigor within there to ensure that we are tracking individuals? So it's quite opportune that I'm able to speak about this today and talk about some of the emerging issues that we see coming out of COVID-19 from a privacy perspective, and how we can navigate those issues as professionals, particularly professionals in-house who may have quite a panicked almost a team behind them wanting to understand what we can do with data. Because data has been at the very, very heart of this fight against COVID-19. In fact, it's the unavailability of data that has led to some of the challenges that we have seen. Without sufficient information about public safety, about the progress of the disease, about the types of people who can be greatly impacted, we were unable to manage it in some countries and really get to grips with the fight against COVID-19. So as organizations, we are now starting to try to understand, what does this mean for us as we emerge from the lockdown? How can we use the data that we have, or how can we go on to harvest data so that we can make a better workplace, better products, better facilities available to our people? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to take you through the new normal. What does that look like for us? I'm going to go on to talk about some of those data privacy principles that will kick into force. And also I will talk about how we can achieve balance in applying those data privacy principles so that we as professionals can get to the correct answer. So what does the new normal actually look like? Well, for many of us in organizations, the new normal is going to be a reverse of the recent trend, which was towards having workspaces, co-working, hot desking within organizations, we are going to see a complete reverse of that trend and moving back towards dedicated workplaces. So that may be working from your home in your remote facility, or that may be having a dedicated desk within your organization. But how will an organization go on to achieve that? Well, in many cases, we're going to see the use of gathering data such as temperature screening, understanding the health of the workforce in order to ensure that the workplace is a safe place. But above that, as more and more people start to work from home, there are going to be issues around security and monitoring. For example, employers will want to know what are the productivity levels of staff who are working from home. Are they actually delivering? How can we use remote monitoring to understand who's working, at what capacity they are working, and how are they delivering? But the other issue that started to emerge as we went into lockdown, and will be one that we will need to focus on, is to what extent can we deploy security across the infrastructure that includes the remote working facilities? Because many organizations to date have not had such a sophisticated approach and may not have moved forward with developing a remote working capability across the entire organization. So as organizations start to look at whether there's going to be a resurgence and how they could manage future either resurgence or future pandemics, they are going to be looking at these issues, and with them come many privacy implications.
So Samantha, let me ask a quick question, because I have had many people ask questions about distance learning, and I know that a lot of higher education institutions are really struggling with this. I've seen my own children struggle with this. How are privacy protocols being developed to make sure that children in particular are protected during this time of distance learning? What are you seeing right now as trends?
Actually, it's quite interesting. So we're seeing a great variation in approaches by different schools and education establishments. What we are seeing is a number of schools are asking questions about the situation at home, asking children directly, what does the experience at home look like? We are also seeing teachers visit the home to deliver homework and also to check on the welfare of the children. How this data is then recorded and shared with the social services, welfare services, has yet to be discussed. But for the first time, teachers are now getting very close and personal with children. There is another privacy impact that many people haven't yet discussed, but what we're seeing is that children may not be receiving the same level of education today as they were prior to COVID. In many cases, distance learning doesn't work very well for teachers delivering distance learning, but also many parents are struggling with delivering homeschooling. And as such, children are not receiving the same quality of education, and there are concerns around educational poverty. With that comes the concern of future discrimination of these children, this generation of children and young adults who are in the education system. Because to what extent will they go on to be profiled and called the COVID generation? To what extent will future employers make decisions about their ability to perform in the workplace based upon whether they didn't achieve a real grade because they didn't actually complete the exam that year? So what we need to be looking at is to what extent can we prevent now any future automated decision making when they come into the workplace, and anything that can prevent their CVs from being being put in front of employers, or any type of profiling that may happen to this generation, so that they will have an equal stab at having a good career, just as the generation after them and those before us.
So on another topic, from a learning perspective, I know that many people in the compliance, risk, privacy professions are also struggling with distance learning because right now there aren't really any conferences to speak of in person. And one of the areas that I've heard about is concerns about how people's data are being handled in this era where the only real option for learning is online, and usually requires registration to avoid things like Zoom bombing. Have you heard any trends in that space and concerns as well, as we try to bridge the gap between the learning that you're doing and being able to do so with some level of anonymity?
Well, the truth is, today we're living in a marketing and advertising dream world. It's an absolute bull market for advertisers and marketers right now, because without any option other than to carry out our normal life online, they are receiving increased amounts of personal information about us and are able to target a lot of their services to us based upon the wealth of data they have. Now, there are upsides of that, but achieving anonymity, well, from a personal perspective, you may not always want to use the same email address, for example. There are ways to achieve an anonymity. However, we are aware that there are privacy impacts arising out of that, but it's for the compliance professionals who are supporting those marketers and advertisers to ensure that they are carrying out the necessary checks and balances to ensure that they do not capture more data than is necessary, that we are really, really robust around the consents or the opt-ins that need to be put in place, and that we are really clear about how we're going to use that data.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. So as we continue into the new normal, what are we going to see? We're going to see increased social distancing, and with that will be tracking. As I mentioned at the start of this, we will see contact tracing apps being deployed across a number of countries, with a variance again in the approach. Where there are strict privacy and data protection laws, we can say that states in those states are more likely to have a better level of privacy built in to those contact tracing apps. There's going to be less use of that data for other purposes other than the limited purpose of understanding who did you come into contact with if you tested positive within the 14 days that you tested positive for COVID-19. However, when we start to travel, we may start to see very different experiences. So there are countries whose approach to privacy and data protection is very different to that we see in the EU, Canada, US, Australia, across the Caribbean and LATAM, and certain parts of Asia. And as we start to travel, we need to consider To what extent will the requirement to have health certification in place, proven that we're COVID free, and also free of what other information are they going to be asking for? And that will start to give rise to quite serious privacy impacts of the individual. And also, to what extent will you be required when traveling to a new destination to provide or to download any apps, contact tracing apps or similar apps deployed within those countries as you move about that country? As another privacy impact that we're starting to see is that there's a discussion starting to bubble up again around the use of facial recognition technology across the board, as seen as the more um, uh, as seen as a better way, I should say, of using or capturing data about people's movements as they go through the public. Fortunately, in a number of countries, we're seeing that that is really not where we want to go. Although quite surprisingly, just last year, the discussion around facial recognition really percolated in the UK, and we saw the UK police forces start to deploy facial recognition in the UK in some parts. So we're seeing increasing and emerging privacy issues that, although we've always grappled with them, there is a drive towards using data in a very, very different way. The healthcare industry is increasingly now reliant on the data to deliver healthcare services. And again, that may be through contact tracing, but it may be maybe through testing of individuals. It may be through providing inoculation to individuals and tracking how they impact people as well. So we're seeing a lot coming out of COVID-19, and we're seeing a growth in technologies coming out of COVID-19. We're seeing an increase in entrepreneurism, firstly, especially around building new apps and remote working, remote services, social interaction. Many, many different types of apps are being delivered right now. And so I think it's really, really important that, again, as compliance professionals, we are at the forefront of understanding what those trends look like so that we can help to advise those businesses or organizations as they navigate those privacy impacts. And as we mentioned before, we talked about what the new normal looks like. The actual impact of that new normal is around this increase in the monitoring and screening and the gathering of data in even larger data sets than we had before. As I mentioned during our previous talk, the use of automated decision making is a very, very important development that we're going to see come out of this new normal. You know, just deciding whether someone can go to a particular place based upon whether they had COVID or not will be a real difference for us.
So I heard a futurist speaking yesterday saying that she thinks there's a real possibility that there will be classes of people based on immunity and based on ability to access vaccines. In some respects, this seems like a huge violation of potential privacy to have to disclose this in order to gain access. But at the same time, I know that there's a countervailing public safety and public health concern that everyone's trying to address. How do you find the balance when there's public safety and public health, and then certain countries like the United States also have parts of our Constitution that allow people to assemble, whether it's for peaceful protest or whatever. This seems like it can be used, right? It can be used for good, and it can be used for not so good. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I'm just going to go to this quote because um, the chair of the committee of a convention called the 108 Convention, which is one of the first international conventions on data privacy, and also the Data Protection Commissioner for the Council of Europe, issued a joint statement. And I think it's really important that we drive this message forward. There is always going to be a balance of the public interest versus the data privacy rights. And striking that balance is key. That balance is not a set balance. It changes over time. So right now, for these limited purposes, whilst we are in more of a crisis mode, the balance has to tip further in favor of the public interest, protecting the public, making sure that we have safety amongst the public and good health of the public. But as we emerge from COVID-19, as it becomes a more distant issue, certainly the balance has to weigh back in favor of the individual and the individual's privacy rights. But most importantly, we cannot we cannot underestimate the need to have a good, healthy public, and that privacy rights are not they're not guaranteed in all cases. There are times when we do have to have derogations from those privacy rights. So will we see classes of people? Potentially. Do I think that would be a breach of individuals' privacy rights? Certainly. Today, would that be a problem? Slightly. When COVID-19 is not in place, will that be a problem? Yes, definitely. So we as privacy professionals or compliance professionals need to keep our fingers on the pulse. We need to remain in tune with where we're trying to get to and what the actual issue is at stake. Because there will be a drive to do lots of interesting tests and deploy lots of interesting technologies and have lots of interesting procedures in place that may not work for the privacy of the individual. And that's where, as a privacy professional, I think it's really important to do the balancing test, but be able to message that balancing test correctly. Oftentimes, organizations are trying to do the best. In fact, not oftentimes, all the time, I think. They're trying to do the best that they can with the information that they have. It's just that they do not always think about the wider ramifications of what they're seeking to do. As a compliance professional, and especially as a privacy professional, if you become locked into a battle over innovation versus compliance, then you've already lost, because privacy is innovation. Without good privacy, you cannot have the innovative solutions in place.
That's a really important mindset shift for privacy professionals, because I don't know that when privacy was initially started, that the mindset was about innovation. I think right now it definitely is morphing to innovation as part of the DNA of privacy.
Absolutely, because privacy has to be built into the DNA of the products and services that we offer. Our users require it. In order to get great user adoption, you need to have that in place. Because otherwise, just like today, people will be raising questions. And if you do not message it correctly, you will have poor user adoption, poor user engagement. So, how we message that as privacy professionals is extremely important. Um, and one of the things that I try to do is to work alongside that development process to ensure that you get me in as soon as possible and I will help you to create. Sometimes I can be more innovative than the actual developers, but that's because I'm bought into that and I am able to then message things and say, you go off, you think and do the blue sky thinking, and I will rein you in when I need to. And I think as we, as privacy professionals or compliance professionals, as we develop in our careers and we start to work with and engage with the business better, we actually get a much better solution, a product that works for all, and we're not locked into that battle.
It's a
So,
key differentiator to make sure that you are showing value as a professional and also growing with your business. So great tip for anybody who's working in the space about how to have a seat at the table that you're able to keep.
and that's the important part, you know, it's not getting the seat, because in a topic that's so fresh and that not many people know that much about, you will get the seat. But be careful that you don't just get the stand-in seat that just we have to have this person along, but we don't really want them there, right? You want to be the person that they want there. Have you
Right.
spoken to XYZ about this? No, you cannot until you've spoken to them. Not because you're going to say no, but because you're going to say, let me show you how. So how we achieve that, especially in the within Europe, especially within the UK, and I don't want to make this very UK European centric, but many of the privacy practices have emerged from the UK and Europe. We use something called the Data Protection Impact Assessment. And this is really, really helpful. It is an outline of the risks and the recommendations to address those risks for any tool, process, or service, new solution. And as we go through this process and we get the business on board to completing this, we take them through the steps of our thinking, so that it's no longer opaque. They understand the journey, they understand what we're thinking about, and they themselves now start to tell you what the issues are. And it's annoying for some people, but they see the value when you get to the end. So, you know, you've got to get them to describe, how does this work? We're going to have a new process in place. We are going to be screening every employee as they come in, checking their temperature, retaining that data, passing it to our third-party provider who will provide them with advice and guidance around the health and well-being of our staff. How do we get from A to B in that process? Well, we need to understand every interaction in that chain. We need to understand every piece of data, how that data is going to be used. We take them through who we need to engage. We take them through all of the risks. Is it really necessary and proportionate to what we're trying to achieve? And we get to the point where we have built it in, all of the outcomes, we've built them in to the actual project documentation. So this now sits as a formal part of any project. And in fact, it's the DNA of any thinking that we are doing about developing new tools, processes, services, software, whatever it may be.
So where have you seen this go sideways with companies? Is it sometimes a lack of project management? Is a lack of understanding the ultimate outcome? What are the few things that you could say would make a huge difference in outcomes?
Implementation, a failure to implement, a failure to train the population or make them aware of what it is they're being asked to do. If you give them a form and just say, here you go, we do this now, and everyone sees this huge questionnaire, they do not understand the value of it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that we implement this in full. It may look like a document, but this is a whole unit. In fact, this is a whole function. And so you need to train anyone who is engaging in that function on its value, firstly. Then how do they get involved in it? And also why we actually do it.
Sound like simple questions, but knowing the answers is quite profound.
Exactly. And as you start to take them through what it means and what happens when it goes wrong. When have I seen it go wrong? Recently, we saw it go very wrong. The actual conversation about Zoom and Zoom's perceived lack of security emerges from someone somewhere not having done a full-scale data protection impact assessment for Zoom and not realizing that we may have done this 5 years ago, 3 years ago, but today the market has moved. Today, end-to-end encryption is a standard offering, or actually expectation. And therefore, we need to revisit this entire cycle again to ensure that we're doing this correctly.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I've heard some people say, well, compliance is the same before COVID as it is after, or privacy is the same before COVID as it is after. And I personally take a lot of exception to that, because I think, yes, the tenets are the same, but the market's changed and some of the considerations have changed. So you actually need to do a DPIA or a risk assessment again, because the field may be the same, but the goals have moved.
Exactly. As you said, the needle has changed. And who is the needle? The needle are the individuals. People,
Right.
as I said at the outset, are more concerned now about privacy. There's more of a debate about privacy. Even people who do not understand the concept of data privacy are talking about it in some way. And that's why I say people either are more polarized. They move to, oh, it's dead, it doesn't exist, it's not important, I don't understand what's going on. They may be saying to you, there's no need for it, I don't do anything wrong, they can watch me all they like. But then you have on the other side of the coin, people who are scared to adopt anything new, any new technologies, for fear that somebody's watching them.
Right. Oh,
So,
I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people.
yeah.
Somebody may be watching me. And actually, I've heard that a lot in the United States, from people who are from other countries that are working here. There's a lot of concern that ICE will use this information, and it has been used
Yeah.
on phones.
Yeah. So we are seeing that needle change, and especially in the workplace, employees' expectations are very, very different. Employees are expecting to be consulted. Employees are expected to, now that they are used to reading privacy notices and policies following GDPR and CCPA, they are expecting communication around these tenets that we have. These are the founding privacy principles, where we talk about lawfulness and fairness and transparency, and, you know, how long are you going to keep my data for? What will you use it for? Only using it for those limited purposes. How do I make sure that you've got the correct data on me? How do I get it back? How do I access it? You know, how long are you going to keep it for? What are those retention periods looking like? And in particular, security. As we said, you know, people's expectation around security has changed significantly. I have friends who will not use iMessage on their iPhone. They will use WhatsApp because it has end-to-end encryption.
Interesting.
You know, and above all, they want to know, who do I go to? Who is responsible? Who do I go to if this all goes wrong? So culturally, we're in a very different space. We're on the back end of a huge number of data breaches over the last few years, significant data breaches. And I think right now, people are even more concerned as they are living their life online. People are partying online for the first time, probably.
With apps like House Party.
Exactly, house party. You know, families are using Zoom to get together and see one another. The increased use of any of the products owned by Facebook right now, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. And then we're just seeing, as we said, in the workplace, there are going to be more and more monitoring solutions deployed. And individuals will be wondering, how can my workplace understand what I'm doing whilst I'm at home? For the very first time, for some people, there'll be monitoring.
They already get to see your room, unless you've got like a Zoom screen or something. They're already getting visibility into how you live your life. And for many people, that was a very private matter.
Absolutely.
Used to be. I mean, there was a judge down in Florida that was railing against a number of attorneys because they were doing court via Zoom, and he didn't like some of the backgrounds that people had, whether it was, you know, their bedroom was in the background or they didn't dress as well as he liked. It's challenging.
Yes, we're seeing another side of people, but I do think there is stepping outside of privacy, but there is something very nice about people living in their authenticity right now. You know, people being more comfortable to show, this is my home, and I have a dog in the background in my home that barks and makes a lot of noise, and I have these books in the background. But then again, some people may not be comfortable with that. And so how will workplaces balance that will be the question. But these are some of the considerations as compliance professionals we do always need to have in the back of our mind. And I say that privacy is a very humanist topic. And I have a test that I always go by, and I say to everyone, my test is it helpful or is it creepy?
That whole creepy line?
The creepy line. And so I just want to always make sure that we're staying on the right side of the creepy line. And it's very easy to push into the other side, especially when you have organizations chomping at the bit to do better. And also, you know, let's be frank, as lawyers, people are trying to escape liability as well. You know, they don't want to be responsible for large numbers of people becoming ill. And if we think about even business travel, how will that be managed going forward? What information will you need to provide to your employer in order to travel? But all of this will require a data protection impact assessment. So it's extremely important that we get used to using these impact assessments and understanding the common principles and have the ability to message these principles. Because oftentimes when we're talking about data privacy, the language bamboozles people. It's like talking tax and math to some people.
Right.
It's how you communicate it. So using different terms is how you get that engagement, you know.
And there's some comments in the chat that are very much agreeing with you about data privacy being very much a humanist topic. So that's one of the big takeaways, I think, from today.
Yeah, yeah. So, do we have any questions coming through on?
No additional questions, but just a lot of agreement from the folks who are listening in.
Excellent, excellent. So I've produced a handout on carrying out data protection impact assessments, or DPIAs. Although they may not be law in other countries, I think this is an extremely helpful exercise. It is a tool that I have used since about 2007 to deploy a number of tools, processes. I use it for apps with my clients, just to ensure that we're hitting the right mark. And as we said, that needle is forever changing, and it allows us to make sure that we are always hitting the right mark. And also it helps us as compliance and privacy professionals to stay on top of technology. I think it's really important that we are abreast of what's emerging. We understand what the futurists are saying in particular, but we also understand how people feel. What does the population feel?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that may vary by geography too.
There was a time when I used to say that.
Okay.
There was a time. I am seeing a lot of talk, even in countries where people are not comfortable speaking outwardly, they still have those concerns around privacy.
There you go.
The privacy concern is different, but to go back to the beginning, health and privacy are two of the things that concern us the most. Without, somebody may say they're not interested in privacy, but everyone in this world pretty much tries to have a lock on the bathroom door.
Right. Great points. So I know we are getting close to the end of our time together. One of the things we always try to ask is, because this is MentorCore, what advice have you received from a mentor that was really impactful in your life? Can you share something that in your career was helpful or insightful?
Yeah, there was a time in my career, and I think I've come to learn that quite a few other women in particular have been through this. But in fact, no, I've got a mentee who's a guy, and he says he's been through the same. But there was a kind of imposter syndrome feeling. Am I supposed to be here? And how do I fit within this? And I experienced that in particular in private practice when I was at Linklaters, where there was a little bit more of a mold as to who you had to be. And actually that was testament to excellent training that we received there. But the best advice I ever received was be myself. Show up as myself, because that's what they hired.
That's great advice. Well, I want to thank you for being here today and thank the folks for attending. And this will be put up on YouTube before too long once we have a chance to get it up on the MentorCore channel. I really appreciate you being here, Samantha, and hopefully we'll get a chance to hear from you again one day.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone who's listened, and also thank you very much to you both at MentorCore. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to joining and participating in future events.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.